To open up here as an atheist coming on your consciousness spirituality podcast, that's something that I struggle with a lot, because there are certain truths out there, and that's a big challenge as an atheist. Even if we are made up of all these factual particles, where does consciousness come from? It just magically somehow evolves from us being made up of atoms. So there are loads of mysteries here, especially as someone that does believe in truth.
If I say that God is not outside and you are actually God, what would that make you feel? Hello everyone, welcome back to the Celestevolve podcast. Today we have Elliot Buick from the Next Generation podcast on our show. Welcome Elliot, how are you doing today?
Very good, thanks for having me.
Elliot, when we first spoke in Jan, I was mind blown by the conversations you were having, and I was shocked that you were just 19 back then. So you talk a lot about how you want to have conversations of integrity. Why is this important for you?
I think without it, to take it to an extreme straight away, everything collapses. If you're not pursuing truth in conversation, you're just at the mercy of your emotions and impulses. And we've seen that recently with political events unfolding in America, and this distinction between words being violence and actual violence being violence. And the way I see it, words can't be violence. They can incite violence, perhaps if used in the wrong way. But if we all go about having more substantial conversations like the ones you're having on your show, and we openly challenge each other's ideas with integrity, that's how we work towards solutions. Because it's very hard in the world to find truth. And you see this with Gen Z. A lot of us are nihilists now, and I have to try very hard not to fall into this trap of determinism and nothing matters, we're just on a spinning rock, bro. Because finding truth is a difficult thing. So after a lot of thought put into it, and I need to put in a lot more across the years, but so far, at the age of 20, I'm sat here and I'm going, there's only one way of navigating this, and that's by testing each other's ideas, picking out the good ones, discarding the bad ones. That's it.
When you talk about truth, do you think there is one final truth? What would your definition be of truth?
I think truth is something that exists independent of subjective human experience, and it is something that is the case. That's what truth is. So a lot of people push back on me all the time from my generation. They go, there isn't truth out there. Everything's subjective, bro. I'm like, okay, let's take a necessary truth. Does a triangle have three sides? Are all bachelors unmarried? Yes. Is that the case in every universe? Yes. There is not a universe that you can imagine where a triangle doesn't have three sides. You can name it something else, but then it's not a triangle. Or we could have a universe where there's a four-sided shape and we call it a triangle, but that's just the verbs or the nouns that we're attaching to the thing. And this is where people often get confused. It's a category error. Just because we could both be seeing the color yellow, but you call it red and I call it yellow, it doesn't mean that there's not an actual felt experience there that we both share, right? So a lot of the time, these conversations of there not being truth out there, they kind of just go down the wrong path and keep on going. And it's difficult because our intuitions, we're so selfish as humans. I certainly am, and I'll admit that, sadly. And hence why we often over-index on our emotion and our perception rather than trying to analyze stuff objectively. But I certainly believe that there are truths out there. Something as simple as a triangle having three sides, like that is a truth. And from there you go, okay, what else could be true? Can we work further than that? I think you can. Maybe 1 + 1 does equal 2. And you see that demonstrated in all kinds of things across the universe and the rules of the universe, so to speak, or at least to do with our planet, something like gravity. There are mathematics involved in working out different formulas in physics, and that would fall through if there weren't certain constants. The universe just wouldn't work. It would be this mishmash that would sort of implode in on itself. And there's this idea of the fine-tuning argument. It's an argument for God's existence, where if gravity, I don't know the measurement, but if gravity was just the tiniest fraction off in terms of its strength, or if it was weaker, the Earth would have just imploded in on itself and we wouldn't have existed, right? So to open up here as an atheist coming on your consciousness spirituality podcast, that's something that I struggle with a lot. And to tie it back to truth, it's because there are certain truths out there. There are certain rules that are the case, right? And if they didn't exist, we wouldn't be here as humans. The Earth would have imploded in on itself. The universe would have whatever. And that's a big challenge as an atheist. And I think that's an interesting thing, is that atheism is often seen as a very intellectual sport, right? You look at people that don't believe in God, and that's because they haven't had enough reason to. They haven't been able to put God into a strict formula. But then you ask them how the universe was created. They go, oh, the Big Bang. It's like, okay, cool. But like, what was the Big Bang? What did that come from? Like, could nothing cause something? And amongst all of that, even if we are made up of all these factual particles that still adhere to truth, where does consciousness come from? Where does this felt experience of being us come from? It just magically somehow evolves from us being made up of atoms. So there are loads of mysteries here, especially as someone that does believe in truth. And maybe it would just be a better cop-out to go, no, I don't believe in truth. Everything's a mishmash. But that's a shitty worldview, I think. I think that's weak. And I think that's an excuse to at least not be contradicting yourself and just kind of throw out an answer. And I see it all the time. Like, people don't want to explore this and admit that there are some things that are clear, like the fact that there are truths out there, but that there are gaps in our knowledge and that we can't understand everything. And I think in 2025, in an era where religion, especially in the West, is on a decline massively, and we're now a minority Christian nation in England for one of the first times in history since Christianity existed, I think Christians and other religious people actually have an easier time of grappling with concepts like the truth, because you can say there's a God, and God is that one truth, and omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and all truths come from God. Whereas I do really struggle with that, the idea of truth. And you might be interested in this. C.S. Lewis writes about this, a famous Christian convert. He speaks about how the atheist worldview and idea of truth and rationality and being able to think your way through problems just implodes on itself. He says, supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody created my brain for the purpose of thinking. It's merely the case that when the atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a particular way, that, as a byproduct, gives me the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thoughts to be true? It's like upsetting a jug of milk and hoping the way it splashes out gives you a map of London. And it's like, I'm just sat there going, yeah, hats off. So short answer to a long answer. I think truth exists, but personally, I can't square that as an atheist yet.
Do you know, if I were to ask you, what do you think would be the difference between mind, body, soul, and consciousness? Would you know what it is?
I've dabbled in it, and I think Descartes writes about this Cartesian dualism, and this distinction between the mind and the body. But I'm always just mind blown thinking about it. It's a difficult one to square, and I don't know where I fall on it. I kind of constantly drift between thoughts. And one day I'll wake up and I'll read something or I'll watch a podcast and I'll go, God just has to exist, man. Like, there's no other way. There's no way, like, we're all just a product of chemical reactions in our brain. So I don't know where I stand on mind-body distinction, but I certainly feel... My intuition tells me that everything's a physical process and we kind of have this illusion of the self. But then when you look at something like consciousness, it's much more complex. And you know, people often think that we just have this one consciousness in us that's kind of us. It's a result of this complex processing that our brain possesses, and that allows us to feel certain experiences. That's what consciousness is. It's this feeling of what it's like to be me, or what it's like to be you. And that comes with loads of complications because no one's managed to work it out yet. No one's managed to work out what consciousness actually is. And philosophers have tried to do it for centuries, definitely longer than centuries, thousands of years. Scientists are working on it now, physicists, and it's just this great big mystery that sort of ties everything together. So I know I'm not answering your question directly of mind, spirituality, soul, all of these different words we throw around. But I think what they're all alluding to is this idea of consciousness and trying to bridge the gap between our understanding and what's actually out there.
So what we say in the spiritual community, for example, there is consciousness to everything. There is a body consciousness. Then there is your own consciousness. Then there is the mind that comes in the way that tells you, for example, you wanted to start the podcast and that's your intuition. You wanted to do it. But then your logical mind, when it thinks about it, the numbers are not matching up. You expected it to blow up. But then you still kept going. That is your intuition. That is the consciousness. That's just you. And then you have the body. So sometimes you can even speak to your body where, let's say you have a pain in your gut. You can ask your body at the gut, you can ask, okay, what's going wrong? I know this sounds like completely out there. And going back to the truth part, because here there is a certain truth that I believe in, and there's a certain truth that you believe in, which would evolve over time. For you, have you ever come across a situation where your truth changed over time?
Of course, but that's not my truth. That's my perception of things. So I think truth, again, it's separate. It's external to our perception of things. We're always working as humans towards getting to that truth. And it's a problem. I mean, there's this classic case of the problem of induction from David Hume. So the idea that the sun will rise tomorrow because it's risen every other day in history, that makes sense. And we all accept that to be true. But really, upon closer examination, we can't ever prove that something will happen just because it's happened the remainder of history, which sounds absurd, right? And I don't think it's useful to think about things that way, because then we just explode. Our brains would explode and our society would implode. But certainly when you look at things in a harsh light like that, yeah, like the problem of induction is real. And that speaks to how, as humans, we actually do lack the ability to prove things in a hard, out-and-out way. Because even if we have this body of proof and examination from the rest of history, could change one day. And obviously one of the big solutions to that is by saying, no, the rules of the universe won't change because there's this author to the universe. There's this creative mind. That's a nice solution, but I don't believe in that so far. So
do you know
do
you know that there are some laws of the universe? There are 12 laws of the universe.
What are some of the laws?
Okay, one of the laws is the law of polarity. Where there is positive, there will always be negative. So if you are right now an atheist, you are still on the other side of the spectrum. You could easily go to the opposite side and become a complete believer in God. That's the law of polarity. If there is...
But does it say that I will do that, or just that there's the opportunity for me to do that?
It means that it's no different. So if you love someone really deeply and then that person does something to you, you're immediately going to hate him or hate her with the exact same intensity that you loved them. Right? So it's no different. You really loved them and now it just became hate. But it's still more or less the same. It can go to the opposite side very easily. That is one of the law of polarity. And then there is the law of cycle. So it's not like, because right now we on the planet, we are going through this thing where everything is like profit and loss. If we reach here, then the next step would be here. But there's a law of cycle. You cannot get over the law of cycle. Every 28 days, the moon would go through the phases. You see, so every time you go up, there would be a dip. So there is the law of cycle. So there's altogether around 12 laws of the universe, which is the ultimate truth that they talk about. And that is a fact.
Who said it's a fact?
So when there is consciousness, okay? So when they talk about consciousness, there are different levels of consciousness. So what they say is that we are right now in between the third and the fifth level of consciousness. Okay? Jesus and the archangels are way above. They are higher consciousness. And the way they describe consciousness is the more you realize you are God, the higher your consciousness would be. So Buddha, Jesus Christ, Kuan Yin, these are ascended masters who came on and then they realized that they were God. So they are of a higher consciousness. So God is not outside, God is within you. That is the whole concept. But what are your thoughts on that? If I say that God is not outside and you are actually God, what would that make you feel?
I think it makes sense. If God exists, then God exists in everything, right? And we often get this wrong when we look at the Bible or other religious texts as an outsider. We think of this bearded man in the sky.
Yes.
That's the classic visualization of God. And it's so far from being accurate and it's disappointing. And I've held that belief since I started, before I started the podcast, and read anything. I'd always criticize religion and say it's stupid without having even looked into it, right? Because it's just this bearded guy in the sky, right? It's like, no, you're straw manning the entirety of religion and you're missing the point completely. So it makes sense, if God exists, that God is in everything. And to tie it back to consciousness, I mean, there's this emergent idea now that's gaining more popularity from what I understand. It's this idea of panpsychism, which is that consciousness is fundamental in everything, which is the same as a religious perspective, I think. And that's pretty cool. And the reason why it's emerged is because people can't seem to square the existence of consciousness in any other way. And there's kind of the easy problem of consciousness to solve. Why can someone go to sleep and their consciousness sort of switches off? Well, that's something that can be examined by looking at their brain activity and sort of their perception of things. But the hard problem of consciousness that people struggle to solve is why we actually have a feeling of being like ourselves. And to break this down, like a computer, it has programming, it's complex. We're in the advent of AI now. Things are only going to get more complex. Mm-hmm. Do they hear the sounds that they're outputting? Do they see the things they're playing? I hope not, based on my search history. You have colors out in the world and they're not out there. You have yellow, you have red, but the red isn't out there in the world. You have the photons that come into your eyes, they hit the receptors, they travel up, and your brain then somehow translates that signal. And we're fine so far. Like we can square all this with science. We've got the signals, comes in, certain light waves give us certain colors that our retina sees. But for it to get into the brain and for us to actually feel the experience, the qualia of red, what does that mean? Where is that feeling of red? Yeah, sure. The photons can bounce into my eyes, travel up into my brain, the information. But for me to experience that red, where is that? And the conclusion, one of the potential conclusions from that, certainly not to throw a conclusion on consciousness, one of the possibilities is that actually consciousness is something that is in everything, which sounds totally woo, and I'm here for it, like it's fun. And then depending on other elements, so having a brain and having these other kind of processing tools, you can unlock different levels of consciousness. I don't know if that's the most useful phrasing, looking at it as levels of consciousness, but you kind of have these different sensations and this ability to actually tap into consciousness. And that's why your eyes enable you to see this red, bring it in, and then experience that red. But that means that everything, like this glass here, it's conscious. And that's a really weird thought, and it's counterintuitive, because we often think of consciousness as something only enabled by being an organism and by having a tongue that can taste or whatever. But the problem there is, like, where does that actual felt experience come from? And you could ask the question of, like, what does it feel like to be a shoe? And that feels like a weird question to ask, and it seems like you can't really answer it. It doesn't feel like anything to be a shoe, but that's because we're relying on the feeling in physical form that we possess as consciousness, and we're kind of getting confused with our definitions. But as a bro scientist, like, just going off of what I've read, what I've watched, so far, all the experts just don't have an answer other than potentially consciousness being something fundamental that lies beneath. And through different processing tools we have, we can sort of tap into it. But that runs into problems too. You have this problem of how then this collective consciousness that's everywhere in small fragments that's in the atoms, how they then can add up to just this one consciousness that we feel. Why is it that I don't feel my liver being conscious? Why is it that I don't feel the consciousness in my toes? So it's all very confusing, and it's all a grand mystery. And perhaps it does mean that the self is an illusion in many ways, but I'd hate to accept that, because I think that skews my perspective on life a lot, which would be horrible to do, but I'm open to it.
Hey everyone, I am super excited to be sharing this amazing news with you guys. I have been officially accepted into the YouTube Partner Program. Yay! This milestone wouldn't have been possible without your incredible support, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of my journey. Whether you've been here from the start or just joined us, your likes, comments, and subscriptions mean the world to me. If you enjoy the content and you haven't subscribed yet, now would be the perfect time for you to join our community. You can also show your support by using the Super Thanks feature or joining our membership for exclusive perks just for you. Thanks again for everything. Now let's dive back into the video. Ooh, it is so fascinating to watch you go between both of these sides and then argue with yourself and then come up with it's. I think you alone, just your whole conversation and the way you're thinking is just amazing. When you said that consciousness is everything and it's woo-woo, I know it sounds woo-woo for the others too, but I understand everything is consciousness. Do you know Dolores Cannon?
No.
Okay, so Dolores Cannon is a famous hypnotherapist, quantum healing hypnotherapist, QHHT she does. What she does is put someone into deep trance and they would be able to recall their past lives, okay? Some of them recalled being a stone. And she asked them, what was it like to be a stone? And they said, slow. Some of them recollected being an amoeba. So when you say it's hard to explain it, but when one person, not just one person, when multiple people have similar experiences of what it is like, then you might start wondering, maybe is it true? And the fear that you talk about, okay, if that is true, then it's going to skew your entire perception of life Yeah. Because that's going to be heartbreaking, right? Your entire perception just crumbles right in front of you. So it makes sense. When you are having conversations like this in different parts of the world, you travel a lot, right? How has the reception of conversations like this been if you were to compare it to the West or in Europe or in the Middle East?
Well, I love having these conversations in the Middle East, especially when I've been in Saudi Arabia, which is, it's the Holy Land. It's the home of Islam. And with that, and with it being a Muslim country, like you could say the England is a Christian country.
Yes.
Like, not really. It's got some Judeo-Christian values, that's sort of the water that we all swim in. It's the air we breathe. But we're not out there praying to the Lord, right? Whereas in Saudi Arabia, that is the case.
Yeah.
It's a Muslim country. And with that, it's just a given. It's like, yeah, God exists, so all of this other stuff can happen. And that's really fun. Like, it's interesting for me to play around with those ideas in different spaces, in different countries. And I think you can pull a lot of different observations from it as well, with how different cultures interact with different problems. And I feel it myself. Like, first, to answer the question, I think in the Middle East, way more open to conversations of spirituality and consciousness and all of these mysteries. And that's great fun. Like, there is this openness. And you'd think that there would be a closed off nature, that people would go just by the book, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to do my bit as a Muslim. I'm going to read the Quran, and that's it. Like, don't ask me any questions. But it's the opposite. Like, people are so open to explore, which is lovely.
100%.
Whereas in the West, I don't know if it stems from the individualistic culture that we now have, and this kind of left brain approach where everything has to be calculated, but people are certainly more closed off, and they just don't get it. And that's not to say I get it. I don't have a clue, but I'm trying to get it, and I'm open. Whereas that creativity doesn't seem to exist as much in the West.
Is it true? Because when I watch the podcast, it's all got to do with the West talking about consciousness. That's not the case?
Well, it's a podcast, and it's a handful of episodes with guests that I've labored to get and that I'm interested in speaking to. But if we take this down to everyday conversations in the pub, there's certainly this thirst for something else out there, because the explanations we have right now aren't working. But we're not quite there yet, and people are still more stubborn, and the stubborn ones are very stubborn. But what I was going to say about the observations of different cultures and different places, I feel it in myself. When I come here to the Middle East, I look back as kind of an outsider, a bird's eye view of Christianity, and I speak to my Christian friends in the West, and I instantly feel less of the magic. I feel less convinced. And I've said I have days where I'm like, Jesus must have walked on water. Like, he must have resurrected. This just must be true. But then as soon as I go to a different country, I'm like, yeah, that's all bullshit. So that's an interesting observation, is how different cultures not only believe wildly different things, obviously, and if you're immersed in a culture, then you're going to buy into those beliefs, probably, more likely. But how looking at yourself when you travel to different places, it's not just that you're no longer immersed in that culture and that you're in another one. That detachment really gives you room to look at things objectively and question these presuppositions that you make about everything and go, I just assumed this to be true, but it was only because I grew up amongst people holding that belief, right? So I always say, traveling at my young age, like one piece of advice I can give someone is just travel as much as possible. And don't go to a holiday resort in Egypt on a package holiday. Like, go to the pyramids, which is still a tourist trap, but immerse yourself in the history of the pyramids rather than buying all the touristy junk outside. Then go off into the middle of the desert with an actual local and live in a tent for a few days. Go to Thailand, but don't just go backpacking, staying in hostels with all the other Westerners. Like, immerse yourself with the local people. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that, even as part of my job. Like, I haven't had to go out of my way as much to immerse myself, but it's super important because it gives you this openness to other perspectives of the world.
Do you think the way people are open to something is not actually tied to their religious belief, but their age? Could it be that Gen Z is open to it, millennials are probably open to it, and baby boomers are not?
Probably, yes. I'm sure age plays into it a lot. But, you know, as Gen Z, like, separating all this generational stuff, just looking at anyone that is of the age of Gen Z throughout history, they're young and they should be willing to learn. They should realize how much they know, having grown up a little bit, but also how little they know. So it's a shame that it feels like the curiosity in places like universities, it's dwindling. But I don't know. I mean, with age comes stubbornness too, right? It's just a different form. It's based on the fact that you have lived a life and you think you've worked out the mysteries of it. And I would assume that that's probably quite a common thing. And I'm sure I will be like that one day, where I think I've worked it all out, because it would kind of be gutting and heartbreaking to reach a certain age and think that you haven't landed on at least some ways to live right. But I think that's the thing we really have to fight is this grasping at ideas and converting them to identity just to make ourselves feel better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the problem lies with Gen Z specifically, regardless of our age. It's something about the times that we've grown up in. I think it has to do with social media and the tribalization of people online. That's what we really have to root out, because as soon as ideas and playful conversations like this about consciousness get tied to an identity too hard, they become very difficult to shake, because to shake them isn't just shaking off an idea and a thought you had, it's shaking off a piece of yourself. And that's not to say that Gen Z, who are predominantly atheist, have that as a problem uniquely. Of course, that comes with religion too. And you see this throughout all of religious history, that thing of identity, and in this case, knowing the truth, means that you persecute people and burn them at the stake for holding other views. So it's a difficult circle to square, but ultimately I try in my life to live with as little attachment to my ideas as possible in relation to my identity.
I think that is one of the after effects that that come up after you start a podcast. You can't stick to one idea. You would have one, and then some guest would come, and then they would tear it all.
Just smash it to shreds. Yeah, tear it to shreds.
They would. If you have interviewed some amazing podcast guests, right? Would you already know before the guest comes whether this conversation is going to be, whether it's going to do well or not?
In what way do well? Like the conversation,
not the metrics.
Floating and going well. I think I've noticed so far in my brief podcasting career that if I'm ever struggling to decide on whether I have a guest on, it's usually not going to be the best conversation. And I've fallen into that trap on a couple of occasions where I want to fill spots. I've got an expensive studio with all the cinema equipment like ready to go. And I think it would be a waste not to have a few more weeks of content. So I've kind of pushed a little bit harder to get guests that maybe I wasn't as keen on. And everyone I speak to, like, I want to speak to, it's because they're interesting. But when you have to force that a little bit more, from experience so far, it's like, the conversation's not going to be as good. You want to be desperate to speak to someone. You want to have already been reading their work or listening to them as a podcaster, and then it's just a joy to interview them because you're kind of a fanboy on one hand, but then you get to be in the room with them. So far, I feel like I can tell, but if we do take it to the superficial metrics of success, views and likes, I think it's very hard. It's very difficult to tell what will actually do well. And a lot of the time, it is just the authentic conversation that ends up really cutting through. And I noticed that a lot. Like whenever people praise me specifically, which is hard to come by, but it happens on occasion, they're always praising something that I didn't think they would be praising. Like I think with my ego, and I do something because I try not to do this, but I do it. I do something and I'm like, yeah, this is going to impress people. Like this is going to make them think, oh, wow, look at this kid. And then they don't comment on it. And then I've like locked myself away for a month reading a bunch of academic papers and books, and no one cares. Everyone's asking me why I'm not going out. I speak about it on a podcast, that specific topic that I've been reading. And then suddenly all the feedback's like, wow, this was amazing. This was so well thought out. So that's certainly one thing. It's like whenever you try to chase the thing and chase success, you end up pushing it further away. Whereas when you just focus on doing the best at the thing you've chosen to do in life, whatever it is, then the success comes at the end of it. Whereas we usually try to fast track that. We chase the views and we chase the affirmation and external validation rather than just knuckling down. Like, I'm going to have the best conversation and let the chips fall as they may.
You said it absolutely right. Because sometimes I think the thing is when you have a podcast guest on, what excites me, like as a podcast host, is the research part. Like sometimes it's more about, oh, finally I get to read this guy's books and I get to read about it and watch his YouTube videos and like go all in than the actual conversation. The research is so fun. How much of a research do you usually do for each of your podcast guests? Like how is it you have a podcast coming up this Friday? Do you research for a week or how does that work?
It fluctuates depending on how busy I am. This whole year, I've been juggling multiple jobs whilst also doing the podcast. So everything you see in terms of output so far, that's with 1/7 of my week to actually dedicate to the podcast. Whereas now I have 7/7 to dedicate to it, which is really exciting. So it certainly depends. And I've rocked up to interviews like completely underprepared. But ideally, I spend multiple weeks researching. Like sometimes I've had a month plus where I'm slowly immersing myself in the topic. I'm watching broader videos, trying to get as many different perspectives as possible, trying to actually stay away from what that person is saying and go to what their colleagues are saying, what the people opposing them are saying, the counter articles that have been written, sort of debunking some of their work. That's like the most important part. And then as you get closer to game day, you're more specific with your research. You're putting in quotes from their papers, from their books. You're looking at what they've said on podcasts, what they've recently spoken about so that you don't say the same thing. So from everyone I've spoken to, I prepare way too much compared to others. I don't think it's too much, but like I haven't met anyone so far that prepares as long as me for podcasts. And maybe that's a bad thing. Like maybe I should be in the moment more. Rather than kind of up in my head. I don't know. Everyone, each to their own, I guess.
Well, Lex Friedman researches way too much. I think he's got a Reddit page where he asks everyone to ask questions, and he's also like this. He's a scientist, right?
Yeah.
Robotics. He's into that. So he also researches quite a lot, and his podcasts are amazing. It's also pretty good. You've met some of the top podcasters, and then you've recently got a shout out from Chris Williamson. I mean, I was rooting for you too. When I saw the reel of Chris talking about you, I'm like, yes, I saw Elliot before you. I was like so happy for you. When you see all of these guests, these podcasters, these big podcasters like Joe Rogan, Chris Williamson, and all of them, who would your role model be? What would be some of the things that you have picked up about them that you like?
It depends on the day. I like to pick and choose. I've got like a little pick and mix of different podcasters that I consume. And I think that's important. Certainly my biggest inspirations that people will see seeping into all of my content, and especially when I'm speaking about something like consciousness or more philosophical, that's down to Alex O'Connor. He's a British philosophy YouTuber, and he's incredible. He's been a great friend to me and just given me way more than he should in terms of time and energy, and I really appreciate that. So he's like great, can play with ideas, and I can just imagine like locking him up in a room for 24 hours with a bunch of surveillance cameras and just seeing himself argue with himself for like 24 hours. That would be a fun thing. I should pitch that as a video idea to him. So he's great for entertaining ideas and just playing with them, just this playful joy. So he's one. Obviously, Chris Williamson, will get him out the way. Fantastic. The way he synthesizes big and complex concepts into pithy aphorisms, as he says. It's definitely changed my life and like all of my friends' lives that aren't that into podcasting. He still has that crossover from TikToks that pop up that other people have made. So he's fantastic for framing and just working out what you think and how to think in a really logical, systematic way. And then I'd say thirdly, Konstantin Kissin, he's a co-host of Trigonometry with Francis Foster and Francis too. They were my mentors and they were like my second and third dads when I was working at Trigonometry and when I was eventually producing the show, traveling around America with them. They brought me up in like my most formative years from age 15, I think, or 16 till 19 when I left last year. Just life-changing impact from them, especially Konstantin, the way he just cuts through every argument with logic and this clarity. He doesn't let emotions cloud his thought. And counter to what a lot of people say, he's not a robot either. Like, he really is an emotional and kind and loving guy with this razor sharp logic that I really admire and I try to work towards. Whereas Francis, even more caring and empathetic and this kind of more right brain approach to things as a comedian still operating. They both gave me this yin yang of like more logic, facts, destroyed in a debate, strong leadership with like being caring, loving, respectful. So that was incredibly formative. I mean, I attribute like everything to those guys. They gave me everything.
When Chris said that Elliot from trigonometry, I mean, I thought you were studying the mathematics trigonometry, and I'm like, oh my God, mathematics too?
I'm way too dumb to study trigonometry.
I mean, that was shocking me, you know. I heard your recent video where you're talking about how important it is, where you reverse engineered from having a child at the age of 30, and now you realize you're already late for it. My question would be, I think we are right now at a time where people are more married to missions and mission statements, right? So for you, why do you think it's important that you have a family and you have a child? Why would that be more of the right way that the world could be changed than attaching to missions or mission statements?
What do you mean the distinction between mission and mission statements?
I guess it's the same thing. Mission statement is the statement that you talk about your mission. So it's the same thing, but people getting attached. Like, for example, right now you have the Next Generation podcast and you are so into it because you want to have conversations of integrity. And this podcast, mine, is about conscious conversations because I got fed up of viral content and people creating these useless content. So more or less, we have a similar mission when it comes to the content we are creating. But now that has become my big thing, right? And for you, you speak about how although this is your big thing, you do care about having a family later on in life. But I don't think a lot of people have that. They take this as the most important work. So what are your thoughts on that? Why is that important for you also?
Yeah, it's something that I, for all of my life, didn't buy into. I always kind of thought about it as something that would happen after the fact. And I knew I wanted kids, like, from whenever, as long as I can remember. But it was never a priority. It was like, I'll get to my mid-30s and I'll bang out a couple of kids, and that'll be the end of it. The only reason it's changed is from doing my podcast and speaking to these world-leading demographers and sociologists and whatever else, and being like, oh, this is the objective data on what's going on. with my generation and older generations now who are getting too old to have kids. It's probably been the biggest shift in my approach to the world since starting the podcast. And there have been so many nuggets of wisdom in every episode, but it's really flipped my approach. This idea of not just putting your career before everything, but the career being in service of being able to have kids and have a family and contribute to society via forwarding it and keeping it going. So it's really cool to see my own perspective shifted so much from my podcast, and I hope that translates to other people as well. And I know that on the team it certainly has done. We're all like, shit, we need to have kids now, like panic stations. But no, there is a balance to be had. And I think with relationships especially, like before last year when I started the podcast, I was like, okay, I'm in my single like gym era where I'm going to grind the gym, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to do my podcast, I'm going to blow up, and I'm going to get all this success, and that's all that matters. And then I'll be able to get a lady that I'm into, right? Because I'll have all of this status and all these metrics of success. Like, first of all, if you get that, you're way less likely to find someone that's genuinely into you for you, because you've got all this other baggage now and all of these other external metrics that may cloud their judgment. But secondly, you're not practicing working the muscle of compromising in relationships and actually coming to agreement over things, because that's something I like really struggle with, and I will struggle with because I haven't had enough experience with it, especially as someone that does have the mission, right? That fucks up everything, because if you have this mission, someone else's opinion on where we should eat for lunch that impedes on you getting to the right location so you can eat lunch and prep for a podcast that's going to change the world, that becomes a real struggle. It's like, of course you need to prioritize yourself and the mission. But I'm slowly learning that life just kind of doesn't work that way. And it's this thing of like the means justifying the ends, right? Like, I'm going to change the world so I don't have to be a good person. I'm going to lie to everyone and screw them over as long as it ends in good. And from what I've seen so far, and perhaps this is me speaking to too many Christians, it just doesn't work that way. You need to build from ground up, and you need to start with yourself, telling the truth, acting in a truthful manner, and then you need to build externally. It's this order amoris, as Christians call it, where you start with those closest to you and you prioritize them. Because, I mean, how on earth are you going to embark on that mission if you can't even compromise with the person that you love more than anyone in the world? And it's kind of counterintuitive, and it's kind of juggling these different positions, right? But I think it's necessary. So, yeah. Working on the muscle itself of compromise and getting into relationships. And thirdly, if you find the right person, they're just going to help you. They're just going to drive you towards your mission, right? And if they don't, then they're the wrong person for you. And I really believe that. And I spoke to Freya India, my friend, on my podcast, and she said this. I was like, yeah, but shouldn't I just focus on my career now and not risk getting into the wrong relationship because the stakes are quite high? And she was like, no, if you find the right person, they will make you a better one. And it's just on you to have faith in your own ability to find the right person. Because ultimately it's like, okay, I think I'm going to find the wrong person that's going to mess up my life and get in the way of me achieving X, Y, Z. It's like, whose responsibility is it to find the right person? It's yours. It's right. Your judgment. And they're not the ones saying, we're dating now, that's it. You have a say. You make the decision for yourself. So I guess it's almost come with a gain of confidence too in my own ability to know what I want and know what I don't, to go, yeah, I'm going to take a risk here, and I am going to spend some time working on getting into a relationship. Because like, you never know when your opportunities will end, and it'll kind of be too late. And it's something I do want to clear up, because people might look at the content I put out and think, I'm just desperate to have kids now. Like, I'm this conservative religious freak that wants to have kids at 20. And like that's totally fine if that's for you. That's not for me. And I'm not in a rush right now, age 20. Like, it's fine. I am 20. But I'm aware of the statistics of what happens once you get to 28 to 30. So it's actually fueled me to work even harder and to try and find a partner now rather than just engaging in these like short-term hookups. Because it's ultimately what's going to fulfill you the most, right? Long term.
100%. This brings me to the last question for today, which ties up everything of this person who tied his mission and having a good family life, who recently got shot, Charlie Kirk. He did such a good job. He instigated these debates and allowed people to speak up. And he was just 31. And this happened. And when I first saw it, I was shocked. I thought this was a meme. This can't be true, because he was so good at what he was doing. Maybe I might not agree to some of the things that he spoke about, but the fact that he allowed a kind space for people to speak up. What are your thoughts? What was it like when you saw what happened? And how do you think this incident of someone who is representing the youth for speaking up, for holding space for such conversations, which is what we are doing too, and then getting shot while he was doing what he wanted to do in his life? How did that affect you? And how do you think this is going to change the conversations that we are going to have?
Yeah, Charlie Kirk was murdered in cold blood, sat under a sign that said, "Change my mind," wearing a freedom shirt in America in 2025.
Yeah.
Like, it's just absurd. And I'm very cautious of not extrapolating from one freak and imposing that on the rest of society. Like, this person did something that hasn't been done in well, this is the thing. There have been assassination attempts on Trump multiple times and other people. But this person's done this thing that's been attempted by a few different people throughout the years, but not everyone. Like, it's not the case that everyone is a cold-blooded assassin. So you need to make that distinction between people actually picking up arms and doing these horrible deeds with the other people that do still have their part to play, that are the enablers, that throw around the language of far-right activist, far-left activist, fascist, communist, Nazi. That's been one of my biggest takeaways, is that you do need to hold up these people who actually pick up the arms as freaks, but you can't forget about the enablers. And that's every single lazy publisher that throws around terms just to kind of undercut someone's argument. And I've seen it, like, looking at the news, and I haven't been able to look at anything other than the Charlie Kirk thing, just 3 days straight after it happened. Like, nothing else. I've never experienced something like this before, where I couldn't think about anything else or read anything else than what happened with that incident. You see it even there after someone, a father of two, 31 years old, husband, gets shot. There are all these snide little cheap digs to undercut his message. Charlie Kirk, far-right ally of Trump. It's like, really? Really? And I'm thinking about putting together a guide for post-assassination humanity, where it's like rules you should abide by regardless of who's being killed. And I think one of them is just give them a few days, at very least, a few weeks, months, to just have been killed and respect that and mourn it, right? Instead of throwing in all of these other political messages. And you see this all the time, like on Instagram stories now. Half of my following is like this. We're worrying about Charlie Kirk, but there's kids starving in Gaza. We're worrying about Charlie Kirk, but look at all the other deaths by gun violence at schools. No one is denying that those things are important. We're mourning the loss of a great human being. And again, separating ideas from the human being. He was a great human being. I didn't align with him politically, like, at all. But you have to separate the ideas, and you have to separate this whataboutism. It's like, what about these people? What about this? You can do that. You can actually do that. But don't post about it related to Charlie Kirk, because if you really cared more about those things, you would just post them. So this is my advice to someone who's going, oh, Charlie Kirk got killed, but what about kids in Gaza? Just post about the kids in Gaza if you care about it. Why aren't you doing that? Well, they're not doing that because it's not really about that, is it? It's about undermining someone that they disagreed with. And I think that goes to bedrock, actually, and I think I could argue that pretty strongly, just based on the fact that they're not just posting stories about the kids in Gaza or people that have died by gun violence. It's specifically related to making a point from his death, which I think is disgusting.
100%. You said it absolutely right. The whataboutism needs to end. And we have come to the end of this podcast. And
Depressing
Elliot,
end, I'm sorry.
but I should have probably, if we started with this, it would have been a depressing
Start, yeah.
yeah. But Charlie Kirk is someone who is representing the youth and who talks about conversations that need to be spoken about. And that's what the Next Generation podcast, and that's what youngsters, wayshowers, light workers, leaders of New Earth like Elliot Buick is doing. Elliot, thank you so much. If you have one final message for the Gen Z who are creating content, what would that be?
Don't let your content inform your reality. Let reality inform your content.
Thank you. Can you tell us where we can find you and the work that you do?
Yeah, Elliot Buick, search my name up anywhere. The Next Generation podcast, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever else, it will be there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Elliot. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and speaking to us today.
Thank you.